Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love, everybody. I'm Brother Ali. Welcome back to the Travelers Podcast. This is the second in a really important series of conversations with my man BK1. And it's important for this podcast because BK is the producer of the podcast. We're partners in Travelers Media. This is our project together. If you missed last week, go back and listen to that. It's a really important episode and it's really dope. We basically outline his early days and how he came to see the world the way he does and understand music the way he does. But then really we get to the part where he and his friends launched an underground independent college radio show, which were really big and important at that time. That happened all over the country. Peter Rosenberg had one in DC, and Odyssey and other people came out of that. And then Peter Rosenberg went on to be on Hot 97. And BK was doing that with his friends in Minneapolis. And it was one of the hubs for underground independent hip hop music in the Twin Cities. And then he brought me into the studio at night. I got to really stretch out and learn how to be myself recording in a studio and on the mic. And then he was my DJ for the first 10 years of my career. So if you saw me perform in the early days, which is when most people discovered us, BK was the guy behind the turntables. And we're known for our live show. We were nice. We're good. And so you'll hear all about the way that we constructed those live sets, stuff that you've never heard before. And we ended up doing a bunch of things that I don't know if anybody else did in the specific way that we did them, the way that we made our name for ourselves in the hip hop space. We ended that one with him saying that he left the road because he wanted to start a family with his incredible wife, who we should have on the show. Shout out to the great Julie Graves, who's just a universe and an enigma in the community in the Twin Cities. And then, we've been apart for 10 years. And so this is the episode where we talk about what BK did in that second act of his life and of his work. And it's incredible. Talk about the amazing work that he did as a musician, as a producer. He also is deeply committed to organizing, activism, social justice in a very real way, not just talking the talk and tweeting, but like really being involved. So you're going to hear some of what that's like and what that's about. And then also, BK started a radio station, a specifically anti-racist radio station. And he ran that station for many years and then handed it off. So there's just so much here to explore, and I'm really grateful to be able to do it. Happy that you're here. We've been sponsored from day one by the Zakat Foundation. Zakat is how Muslims give back, but it's not just for Muslims. Like, it's a Muslim-led organization. They don't proselytize. They don't only help Muslims. A lot of their donors are not Muslim. So go to zakat.org, zakat.org. While you're listening to this, just like go there on your phone or whatever, look at the stuff they do and know that if you give money to them, whether it's $5 or $5,000, it goes directly to people. This is legit. So enjoy this episode of the Travelers Podcast with my man BK1. When you and your wife started your life together, like a big part of it is traveling, not just doing like tour, not even interested in tourist traveling.
Mhm.
There's never going to a resort. The traveling that you guys would like literally budget and save your money for like 18 months because you want to go and not just visit Argentina or Venezuela or whatever, but like
Mhm.
we want to experience what it might be like to just really be part of this culture as much as possible.
Right.
Like we want to stay in the places where people are. We want to be amongst locals. We want to eat the food they eat. We want to walk the streets they walk. We want to like
Yeah.
experience what humanity feels like in this part of the world.
Mhm.
Then you went to Brazil and came back with a very clear new appreciation and new understanding of music
Mhm.
and like how it all ties together and what it means
Yeah.
and I want to like start there and then get into that album and like what it turned into,
Sure.
the Radio de Cannonball.
When Julie and I would travel, we would, of course, spend a ton of time together, but we would always build several days into our trips where she and I could each just go do our own things. For her, that meant mostly taking pictures and shopping for brightly colored dresses and
Glasses. The wildest glasses imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, it meant record shopping. So,
Mhm,
I brought a portable turntable with me and was hitting all the flea markets and street vendors and traditional record shops and, by the end, individual folks' houses. I spent a ton of time speaking with vendors and asking questions and taking notes.
mhm,
And then, really importantly, after buying records, coming back to the place that we were staying, we were staying in a Brazilian couple's home that really had kind of a community around it. And as much time as I would spend shopping for records, I would spend an equal amount of time playing those records back at the house and talking about what I was hearing and asking questions about them and
mm,
learning about how they connect,
mm,
not just to other artists and strains of music history, but to Brazilian history at large, and the culture, the traditions, the belief systems. Brazil is a large country.
mhm.
What regions do these different things come from, and how do those regions differ, and what's the tension between them, and what does it mean that a record like this came from the South? What, why is so much of the music that I'm hearing from the North like this? Oh, that's where the main slave port was. And so the history there and the tradition and just
Yeah,
the lineage of
yeah,
who lives there and who has lived there is entirely different from, the more metropolitan cities down south. Okay, well, that seems important.
mhm,
The more that I learned about this music and the context in which it was created, the more parallels that I saw with what I knew back home. I came to understand Brazil, at least in one way, as a country where so much has been thrust upon it and stolen from it
mhm.
simultaneously that sometimes there's an identity crisis.
Yeah, white supremacy, colonialism, enslavement is, like, really based on, like, stealing and reducing
Mhm.
and robbing and denying
Mhm.
and yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And in Brazil, one of the responses to that identity crisis is something that they called cultural cannibalism.
Mhm,
This idea that we're going to take all these different strains of things that we've come in contact with, from things that are homegrown, like indigenous music,
mhm,
to things that were forcibly imported, African rhythms,
mhm,
because of the contact with US military bases,
mhm,
American rock and roll and jazz and soul music, music from the Caribbean, classical structures that come from Portugal and Spain. And we're going to take all of those things, and none of them are who we are, but we are going to use them as tools
mhm.
and reformulate them into something that is uniquely ours. We're going to take all these different things
Synthesizing things from
that
a
that
different parts of what already exists.
right. And in that, I saw hip hop. So I got back home and felt really clear that there was this story that I wanted to tell
Mhm,
and this amazing music that I wanted to share.
yeah,
And, as I said at the end of our last conversation, our time on the road together was coming to an end. And we had these 10 years of amazing experiences. And I really wanted to put a punctuation mark at the end of that sentence. So I called my production partner, Benzilla, and met with him in my basement. This was the spring of 2009. And, I showed him all the records. I was like, here's a bunch of samples. Here's a bunch of drums. Here's these ideas that I have. This is the vision for the album. This is the story I'm trying to tell. This is what your role would be. This is what my role would be. And before you say yes, I need you to understand something.
mm,
For this to be what I want it to be, it has to be done. And like the records need to be in hand by this date in the fall, because that's when I leave on my final big world tour with Ali. So let's think about what that really means. Let's work backwards. For the albums to be done and in hand by this date, that means they need to be turned into the record label by this date, which means that they need to be turned in for mastering by this date, which means that we need to get them mixed by this date, just kind of working backwards. And it got to a place where it was like, to pull this off, all of our work needs to be finished. The beats need to be done. The songs need to be fully fleshed out and arranged. The guests need to be confirmed. They need to have written their contributions and recorded them. And then the songs and then the album need to all be assembled. All the work
Mhm.
needs to be finished in a little over 6 weeks.
Crazy.
That entire record got made in 6 weeks.
I didn't realize it was that short a period of time.
It was incredibly short, incredibly short. Uh, I would say that we finished all of the instrumentals in about a month. And in the end, about maybe 90% of the guests that I had in mind came through and appeared on the tracks that I had pictured and in the combinations that I had wanted. There were one or two guests that just didn't work out. There was a track that I was really excited about Pharoah Monch being on, and he was excited about it. And it just, we waited and we waited. And when it was really clear that it wasn't going to happen and we were out of time, in like a last minute Hail Mary, I reached out to Raekwon, and literally 24 hours later, he turned in this great verse and the album was officially done.
He killed it. He did so good. And then Shaka and Ray on the same song is like, oh man,
Yeah,
dope.
that's one of my favorites on the record. And, that speaks to another thing that was really important to me. I've talked a lot about the story that I wanted to tell about Brazilian music, but there was also a story that I wanted to tell about hip hop.
Mhm.
You know, the time that you and I spent touring was really a very divisive time in hip hop. Uh, Things were very siloed. People had really dug trenches around their own camp and were really quick to say that they listen to the real hip hop and everything else is fake. And our a lot of the audiences that we were playing in front of in particular, frankly, were new to hip hop, and people who are new to something are always the first to be certain that they know what the real is and what the not
Yeah,
real
and then
is.
also like a
And
lot of them were like white kids
yeah,
who didn't have the like, and that's what I'm saying. Like of all those guys, I really appreciated them all, the guys that were at the beatbox.
yeah,
But me and you had a shared understanding that this is like part of something much bigger. You know what I mean? That we also have like a personal commitment to,
yeah,
having a positive impact on
right.
and like being a certain way in the world. You know what I mean? And so yeah, and so a lot of the people that were listening to that stuff were also white kids who not only didn't have that historical context of the music, but didn't even have a broad view of what this music actually means. They were kind of looking at the music in the very kind of bite-sized section that they were interacting with. For them, like they were centering hip hop that was not center to hip hop.
Mhm. Mhm.
So for them, like Aesop Rock and Atmosphere is hip hop.
Yeah.
But there are people that are, that really know hip hop and like Aesop Rock and Atmosphere aren't center in their world at all. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? They might not even they're very important, people in the culture that might not even know who those people are.
Yes. Yes,
So yeah,
exactly.
it's a very, very different approach.
And so in picking guests for the album, something that I was very conscious about is picking people from different corners of hip hop, different regions, even slightly different generations. Uh, because I wanted to say with this album and with this lineup, these artists are all part of the same thing. They're all part of something that's much
Mhm.
bigger
Yeah.
than just the corner of hip hop that they're from. They're bigger than the lane that they're driving in or the conception that their fans have about what real hip hop is.
Yeah.
You know, AC Alone and Merce and the Grouch and Micah Nine are part of the same thing that Fonte and Black Thought are part of.
Mhm.
You know, I Self Divine belongs on a song with Raekwon from Wu Tang. Brother Ali absolutely belongs right next to Scarface.
Yeah.
And then, adding one more layer, I wanted to make a statement, if for nobody else than just for myself, about, what my musical identity is. And so this is primarily a hip hop record, but it was really important to me to bring in, a 9-piece brass band and the Hypnotic Brass Ensemble
Mhm.
and to compose with them. And it was important to me to bring Abby Wolf in
Mhm.
and to have a song with no drums on it that was rich in harmony and melody and pointed to a different section of my record collection that I value every bit as much as all the crates of hip hop that I
Yeah, man.
have.
It's an incredible record, man, and for it to be your first one is really, and I didn't realize how quickly you made it. Like, I just didn't realize that it was I mean, I knew that it happened pretty quickly, and I knew that you were doing that at the same time that I was, because I was, like, finishing the Us album when you were doing
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely things in hindsight that I see on that project that wear the scars of being an album that was put together too quickly.
Mhm.
There are songs on there that if I had had another month to just sit with and listen to enough, I probably would have cut. There's 1 or 2 songs that I would have loved to include that just couldn't come together. There's 2 guests that I was really excited about that we just couldn't make it work.
Yeah.
Doom was one of them. MF Doom was one of them, and we were able to get him on the EP of remixes, which was really cool. But, he was supposed to be on that song Blood Drive with Slug,
Mm.
and I think that would have been incredible. It was really disappointing that that wasn't able to come together. And that's an example of something else you see. There's a couple songs on there that to my ears don't sound finished. But we just ran out of time and had to let them be what they were. And there's at least one song on there that I, the message behind it, I'm not particularly proud of having my name attached to. And, that kind of points to something else. As my first album, I really hadn't found my role as a producer yet. There's tons of producer choices on there that I'm really proud of, but I still in a lot of ways recognize now that I was thinking about this like a DJ. In all these collaborations, I was very clear in my head. I don't feel this way at all anymore, but I was really clear at that time. Like, I make the music. In no way is it my role to tell the MC or singer or whoever that I'm collaborating with, how they should be showing up. I was still viewing myself as a DJ where I'm in the role of supporting you, forgetting or like not recognizing this is going to bear my name. I'm on the top line of this, and anything that goes out on this represents me and my choices.
Uh-huh.
Um, a funnier example of that is that there's a song on this album. I'm not going to name it, but that what you're hearing is the second version of it. And the first version of it had a whole segment of it that was deeply critical of rhyme sayers and of specific staff members at rhyme sayers.
I don't think I caught that. I don't think I realized that.
Yeah. Again, I was just like, well, that's what they showed up and felt compelled to say. And so I just turned it in, and I gave it to I gave an early version of the album to Slug, and he hit me up right away and was like, "You're giving it to Sadiq like this?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, "I mean, there's like a whole verse about him. Did you check in with him about that?" I'm like, "No." That's what so and so had to say. um, and that artist ended up rewriting the song, but it wasn't because I asked him to. You know,
Mm.
there were conversations that happened, uh, and that artist made the decision that that's what they wanted to do. But it wasn't because I said this is coming out under my name. That doesn't represent how I feel. Let's not do that.
Uh-huh.
I just really hadn't found my voice as a producer yet.
Mm.
But, all those criticisms aside, this is genuinely a great record, and I'm so proud of it. And I have nothing but good memories of working with Ben and working with all the guests on it. and it led to some amazing opportunities to perform live with, and then on the EP of remixes that followed it, collaborate with some of the very musicians from Brazil who had inspired the record and who I had learned so much from and who I just had such deep, deep admiration and respect. And so, this record and everything that it made possible for me are one of the highlights of my career for sure.
Man, so not long after the Radio de Cannonball album, you started working on another project called Bones and Beaker, which is not a hip hop project, but it still feels really rooted in hip hop. You know what I mean? It feels like,
Yeah. Hip hop is in its DNA somewhere.
yeah. So that's you. Like, how do you describe that project to people? I know how I describe it, but I'm curious how you.
I'd rather hear how you describe it to people. I've always struggled with knowing what to call it.
So what it seems like to me is that you got this like hip hop DJ and producer.
Okay, so you're not good at it either.
No, but I'm saying like this, like who's got a wide knowledge of music from around the world and different musical traditions and stuff,
Mm,
but primarily like it still feels sample driven and it feels like it's starting in a drum machine. Like it feels like that's the impetus for most of the songs. And then you have like a singer songwriter who is somewhere in between folk and pop.
yeah.
Like, it feels like there's elements of folk in there, but, like, the way that
Mhm.
there's something about the melodies and harmonies and stuff like that that feel like so it's like a folky kinda pop singer playing the guitar and singing over sampled breakbeat stuff
Oh, that
with
sounds
live instruments,
terrible.
and we and we yeah. Yeah, man, it's totally killer, man. You should really hear this stuff. It's really cool stuff, man. Yeah, it
Do you
sounds like
remember when we were out in some ski resort in, like, Colorado somewhere, and we opened for Jerry Garcia's son? And he basically just had, like, a Roland drum machine that would play sick beats. And then, like, he would play acoustic guitar over like, he'd just kinda sing and play guitar over it for, like, 8-minute stretches while this enormous room full of shirtless people danced like crazy. It was so weird. Um, yeah, no, the Bones and Beaker thing, the best that I ever came to, like, an elevator pitch for it was I sometimes said that it was, Paul Simon if it was sample driven, and that's not really perfect either, but, the thing
That's really
part
good,
of
though.
the problem with it is that it is a band that never really had the conversations that you're supposed to have at the beginning of becoming a band. We didn't mean to become a band and we didn't mean to record an album. What happened is that, Tony and I both worked at a group home. When I was touring with you, it was always important to me that when I came home, I had a job waiting for me. It was important in part because I didn't want to make a bunch of money on the road and then come home and spend it all and then have to go back out on the road to make the next batch of money to come home and spend.
Hey, man, there's nothing
Um,
wrong with living like that. There's
no,
there's
no
nothing
judgment,
wrong with
no
that. There's
judgment,
nothing
no
wrong with
judgment, man.
doing that.
The other piece of it was that the road was a whirlwind for the ego. And there was something really comforting and important about coming home and having a job that just had you, shoveling manure again.
Almost literally, like, you were
Almost, yeah, sometimes almost
helping
literally.
people clean up their bio, situations and their toilets and
Yeah.
clothes, and yeah, man.
Yeah. Yeah, so for the first half of touring with you, I was working at a food co-op and then eventually got fired from there and ended up working at a group home for folks with developmental disabilities. It was a duplex with 3 women on one floor and 3 men on the other, who were all in their, like, 60s and 70s. And, Tony was another person that worked there. It was a job where it was one thing or the other. It was either really intense and took every bit of energy and focus and empathy, that you could muster, or there were hours with nothing to do at all,
Mhm.
and it was just mind-numbingly boring. And, what we came to figure out is that for all the things that made Tony and I really, really different, not just in what we liked artistically and our own approaches to making art, but even about how we talked about and thought about art, just even the communication style was really different. But we were also both really similar in that we had just ended sort of long time commitments to these big music projects. I had just gotten off the road with you, and, I have a record collection that's a lot bigger than just hip hop. I have a background that we've talked about that goes beyond just hip hop. And I really spent 10 years very hyper focused on this one part of my artistic interest in my work with you, and was just sort of itching to do something weird and different. And similarly, he had just left a band called Villa that had kind of a Beach Boys sort of like harmonic pop thing, guitar, power pop kind of a band.
Mhm.
I had heard an EP of theirs and thought it was really beautiful. Tony has this wonderful ear for harmony, and is he just comes from a really classic singer-songwriter, very melody driven sensibility. We were so comically different in how we approached music that it never would have occurred to us. It would have been laughable to try to make a band. We were just kind of trying to amuse each other. We were trying to pass the time. The first couple weeks of it were laughably bad. It was ridiculous, the thing, because we were trying to like give each other what we thought each other wanted, and it was just showing off how little we understood about what each other was good at. The turning point came when he gave me this song that he was really excited that he had just written, and it was a fully fleshed out song. It was very clear, this, these are all the parts of it, and these are the orders that they go in, and this is how it connects, and here's the guitar part that really anchors the whole thing, and then all the vocal parts are all set. I mean, so it was a fully fleshed out song, but it was only guitar and vocals, and it was upbeat, and it very much fell into that sort of Paul Simon kind of feel that I alluded to earlier. I just started finding it was a little similar for me to putting together Tame of the Cannonball. I just started taking all these percussive snippets and playing them off of each other, and put together this interesting groove, and ended up putting together sort of a whole rhythm track um, that had things coming in and out to accompany what he had written. And it was the first time that it was like, oh, that was something that's worth something. Um, and in the months that followed, we did everything from me giving him tracks that I had made with hip hop in mind, like the track that ended up being the biggest Bones and Beaker hit called Heartbroken in Love. And when I gave that to him, it was like my version of what he had given me. Everything was in place. There was a beginning, middle, end. There was a bridge where everything drops out and then it builds up and everything stops and then it drops in. I mean, everything was there except the words for him. The story of that song is a little bit like the Forest Whitaker one. He was trying to make me laugh. He thought that the beat I had given him was super cheesy, and he said, "I'm gonna write something to this that sounds like the theme to The Love Boat." That's what he wanted. And, it went on like this, and we got to maybe 8 or 9 tracks. Some of them, we sat down across from each other with nothing in mind and just hashed something out. Sometimes I gave him a little something, sometimes he gave me a little something. They all had sort of a different workflow and a different balance of Tony to Brendan. And then at a certain point, he said, "Hey, you're the one with the technology to like record all this stuff and like assemble all this stuff. So all the music is on your computer. I've never heard any of it except in the moment that we made it. Would you be willing to like burn me a CD that has all the stuff on it?" And, it's just in my nature to put a little thought to like the arrangement, the sequencing of things. And so I spent a couple minutes like putting the tracks in the right order so it'd be fun to listen to. And by the time that I had done that and maybe like popped it in the CD player in my car to drive it over to him, I knew we made an album, a really good album. It's not done, but this is an album, and it doesn't sound like anything I've heard before, and I would buy this. This is good.
Mm. Yeah. Man, that's my favorite part of a project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you get to that place where you're like, "Oh, this is like a body of music, and this is what it says, and this is what it feels like, and this is like,"
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like when your kids, like you have those moments with your kids where like they start saying words and things, but then they say something that's like their thought, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, oh, okay, so
I
there's like a
just
whole
met you.
person in there."
I just
Yeah,
met you.
that's what it
Yeah.
feels like when you finally
Yeah.
like make a playlist out of the songs, and you're like, "Oh yeah, all right, that's the best part, man."
Yeah. So I showed it to Sadiq at Rhymesayers first, just out of respect, like right of first refusal. But I was really honest with him that I didn't think it belonged at Rhymesayers. He liked it a bunch and immediately agreed that Rhymesayers wouldn't be the right place to go with that. And then other than that, we shopped it to only like 3 or 4 labels because I didn't wanna just take it to a label for the sake of taking it to a label. It seemed like a project that had legs, but one that only certain people would get and that needed to be
Mhm.
presented the right way. And so we took it to like Sub Pop
Mm.
in Seattle. We took it to Luwaka Bop, which is David Byrne's label, David Byrne of the Talking Heads.
Oh, okay.
Um, we took it, we took it to, kind of places like that, places that really have a personality as a record label and have a reputation of understanding weirdos and knowing what to do with them.
Yeah.
and and on almost just kind of a whim, it occurred to me that the like record digging Bible Wax Poetics, the magazine, had been doing more and more work releasing new music. They for quite a while they'd been releasing like reissues of 45s and stuff. But in like the last year, I'd seen them release a couple 45s by newer acts. And so just for whatever reason, I guess because there was some really weird random samples that ended up on that record, I just thought maybe they would appreciate it, and so I sent a copy to them as well, and, like, 3 days later, we heard from Wax Poetics, and they had to have it. They just had to have it.
That's such an incredible full circle moment because of the fact that, I mean, everybody that's into music, but especially like digging,
Mhm.
wax poetic, like you said, is it's the Bible. And
Yeah.
I remember very specifically, you almost got in a fist fight with somebody you have no business being in a fist fight with over the new over
It was
the
the principle of the matter, man.
yeah, man. On tour, there was this like crazy tour stories, but man,
Yeah.
for that to really be it's your second, album, your second major release, but f a very new style of music, not only for you, but, it's a
Mhm.
very, very unique thing, to be able to find a home and for the people that you respect so much and are like such a part of your musical journey that led you to, you know what I mean, had such a role into creating that music itself.
Yeah.
Like all of the digging and the exploration and excavation of music that went into all of that stuff. For those people to say, we have to put this record out. I mean, what kind of validation was that, man? That had to be next level.
Yeah, it was really, really special. I have every issue of Wax Poetics that they ever released, and it's not just that I have them. That they're like old X-Men comics where I haven't broken the spine on them. The very first issue I bought when it came out, and I wrote directions. I can't tell to where. It starts with taking 94 East, but like I wrote some really chicken scratch directions to get to somebody's house or some business or something on the back cover, and by issue number 2, they're already cared for immaculately, put on the shelf like a library, cataloged so, like, I almost immediately saw the value in what they were doing, and it's not just the stories that they're collecting in that magazine,
Mm,
or the people that they're getting to tell them. It's also just the presentation.
mhm.
they put a lot of work into making it feel good in your fingers. You know what I mean? Like it feels like something that an art museum would produce or something. Like they
Mm,
put a lot of work into just making something that, just like the records that people collect, is like a tangible item to hold and appreciate and value. And there were pieces of that that showed up in working with them as a record label as well. You know, we got to Tony and I got to work with the legendary designer Freddie Anzures, who has done so much of their layout work and cover design. The original iPhone, there's iconic pieces of the first iPhone that are hit, like not just he was part of the team. It's like, no, that's him. He did that.
mm,
He designed the slide to unlock function on the phone, and the sound that it makes that everybody would instantly recognize.
mm.
That's him. And so, like, this is the guy who's now doing the Bones and Beaker logo that's showing up in like magazine spreads. And,
Crazy.
uh, if I'm being honest, there were also some frustrations in working with Wax Poetics. They were a small team, and the magazine was their main focus. And, I know from radio and from podcasting that when you are working on something that has a reoccurring deadline where you're working, working, working to get the new issue out, and then the second that it's out, the deadline just renews. And so there's always the pressure of the looming deadline hanging over your head. Without saying it, we understood that we just weren't their first priority. Some opportunities got dropped, and there were things that were disappointing about that experience. But in the end, I just have nothing but good feelings about working with them. I'm so appreciative that they gave our weird little album a home and showed it love. And I think added credibility to it by putting their name on it. And when they ended up folding the record label, they gave us our masters back. And in the process of just kind of getting everything set up under me and Tony's name, for the first time in a long time, I peeked under the hood at how this music was performing and who was listening to it, and was really surprised. I thought that this was just our weird little side project that a handful of friends and a few random people knew about. And I'm now seeing that some of these songs have been listened to millions of times from people all over the world. And one of them in particular, every Valentine's Day, sees a huge spike in listenership. And you know there's a bunch of people that care about this music, and that makes me just genuinely happy.
This is just one of many conversations with people that I know, that I love, that I do life with, that my life's work is so intertwined with theirs. And I really would hate the idea of taking all of these beautiful connections, and the people that listen, you're part of it too. All of this building that we've done, we've been building it because you listen to it, you come to the shows, you wear the shirt, you buy the albums, you stream the music, all of that stuff. You're part of what we're building. So it makes it easier, and it just makes it all that much more meaningful to open up and share all of this. But to take that and then just attach it to some corporation who maybe their product is cool, maybe their service is cool, but they're just really in it to make money. We don't know them. They don't know us. They don't really care about us or care about you. They're just looking at numbers. Send us your numbers and show, and we'll tell you how much we'll pay you to run ads on your podcast. It's just not that interesting to us. You know what I mean? We're people that came up without record labels, without sponsors, without corporate money. We're people that were just like, okay, you can call us squares, but we just want to work directly with the people that our art, our exploration of ourselves is true, and it rings true to them, and they support it. And so that's what we're doing with this podcast and with the work that we have going forward. We have something called the Caravan. You go to brotherali.com, and first of all, sign the mailing list. I write the emails. I don't blow up your email address. I'm actually overdue for sending people an email to let them know what's going on. But that way we don't have to rely on social media. But then you go to the section called join, and You can actually become a part of this particular leg of the journey, so much of which is happening online. So we aren't always going to be able to stand in a room together and do shows, but we're still got all of this music and these videos and these conversations and these lessons and lectures and all classes, all these things that we do. If you go to the join section on brotherali.com, there's a caravan where for only $5 a month, you can jump in and support what we're doing. And every week we upload new, rare, exclusive music and videos and all of that stuff. So, I mean, last week to commemorate the first episode of BK1, we uploaded the full recording of a concert from 2009, like one of our last tours together when we did the Us album. And it's just a random night in Louisville, Kentucky that somebody recorded. We just wanted to share that with you. My voice is beat up. You know what I'm saying? It's like you just hear what a night was like on tour during the height of underground independent Midwestern hip hop. This week, we just uploaded a very special project that you could get before, but it was only on cassette. Somebody uploaded it to YouTube. It's a project that I did entirely with Jake One of home recordings. These are like demos that we made that we didn't end up taking into the studio and releasing as an official album. So it's super dope joints that I made in Seattle with Jake One in 2012, and we called it Left in the Deck because the idea is that it's like, this is a tape that just got left in the deck that we never pressed up and put out to the world. So go to brotherali.com, get down with the caravan. That $5 level gets you instant access to all of that stuff. Like I said, there's something new up there every week, rare stuff, exclusive stuff, music, beats, videos, all that, all that. And there's also a $25 level, but there's a $100 level, and that's a lot of money to invest. But on that $100 level is regular conversation that goes on throughout the year, throughout the week, throughout the day. It's a small group of people. We keep it limited, but these are people that are really sharing life together. And we meet up and hang out with each other. We have Zoom calls that we do. These are people that are really part of each other's lives. And because I'm involved in so many different communities, they actually come from different communities that wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for this particular bond. So there are people really sharing life with good faith with people that they otherwise would never know. Really beautiful thing. So go to brotherali.com, sign a mailing list, hit that join section, get down with the caravan. I really want to ask you, and I want to have some time to make sure we talk about the very real, like organizing activism work that you've done over the years.
Hmm.
And I think a cool way into it, I was just thinking this as I was hearing you talk about Radio de Cannonball. There was a remix that Astra Black, Zulu Zulu did
Mm.
for one of the Radio de Cannonball joints. And I remember that there was a time where you got arrested doing some organizing and protesting and like civil disobedience stuff, and they held you for longer than normal. Like a lot of times we get arrested, we're out the next day. It's not like we're going to do a bid
Mhm.
because of that.
Mhm.
But you were held for longer than usual, and there was like
Yeah.
all kind of weird stuff going on around it. And I remember when you came out, you had just heard the Astra Black Zulu Zulu remix of one of your joints. And do you remember that you were saying like that was something that you played in your mind and it was kind of like your Zen
Wow.
moment that was helping keeping you sane during that time when you were in prison? Am I remembering that right? And what was all of that period of your life like for you? I just want you to
Wow.
share it with people.
You're absolutely right, and I had completely forgotten about that, and that's kind of a special memory. I'm really glad you said that. Um, yeah, that was a tough one. There's pieces of the circumstances around that I can't talk about. But
Gangster.
essentially what
That's
happened.
that's yeah, that's gangster.
Well, so the whole world knows about George Floyd.
Hmm.
But in 2015, Jamar Clark was killed
That's right.
a couple blocks from the fourth precinct over in North Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And, after George Floyd, there's the iconic images of the precinct here in South Minneapolis. That's just a couple blocks away from my house here.
Yeah.
Um, got taken over and then burned down. But in 2015,
Hmm.
residents and organizers over in North Minneapolis took over the fourth precinct. They didn't burn it to the ground, but they locked it down and made it
Yes.
inoperable for a
Yes.
long while,
Yes.
and, it's worth saying that that began, I believe, in November, and it lasted through just the bitterest months of
Yeah.
Minneapolis winter,
Yeah.
and so, we had campfires going over there. That was a time where you could tell who was an ally because you'd be waiting in line for something and smell the campfire on people. You could smell the burning scrap wood on people
Mm.
and know that they had spent the night over at the 4th precinct. So that was November of 2015. July of the next year,
Mhm.
Philando Castillo gets murdered by the police, essentially in St. Paul.
School teacher, dad, like
I
somebody who
mean,
like somebody that's in our like that we know, like this person is like in our community.
with his partner and his partner's child in the car with
Yeah, so
him.
Ben Zilla, who worked with you on Radio de Cannonball, Philando Castile was his daughter's teacher.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's how close this
Yeah,
particular
this
case
is
was.
this is somebody, and we should never have to justify why the police killing somebody is wrong based on all the good things they've done with their life.
Mhm.
Human life just has value,
That's
period.
right. Yeah.
That being said, there was some acute pain, in part because this was somebody who was just beloved by the community.
Yeah.
This is somebody, I mean, we watched it, those of us who could stomach it, watched him die on camera.
Mhm.
He literally bleeds out on camera in front of his partner with his partner's child in the back seat. His partner, the worst part of it all, I'm sorry if this is hard for other
Like
people to
triggering
listen
and
to,
difficult.
you know, but his partner's child is in the back seat helping the mother
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
cope with it.
It's
Like,
okay, mommy.
oh, just just absolutely devastating to watch.
And she's saying to the police officer, "You just killed
Yeah,
you just killed him.
yeah,
Like, I cannot believe you just killed him." Yeah, they pull him over and the whole thing is on tape, and he says, I'm a legal registered owner, a gun owner.
yeah,
The weapon is in the car, everything is legal. This is where it is, completely complied with everything."
yeah,
They killed him in front of in front of his partner and stepdaughter, and then the police went free.
that's right. And again, this is less than a year. This is like half a year after this same thing had happened. I mean, in
Mhm,
a moment when this is a nationwide moment is happening,
mhm,
around police violence, and Black Lives Matter had become strong and well organized with some really charismatic and strong leaders here in the Twin Cities. My family, I was a stay-at-home dad at the time, more or less, and, my young kids and I were regularly participating in, occupying freeways and,
mhm,
doing what we were being called upon to do, for that movement. After Philando Castile, there was an incident on the I-94 freeway right in the Rondo neighborhood, a historic Black neighborhood that was destroyed, when that very freeway was built through it, intentionally dividing it. Myself and a group of about 60 other folks, all got arrested. At the time, you made reference, in talking about this and bringing this up, to other times that we've been arrested. You go into some actions, planning for arrest.
mhm.
I know that there are iconic images of you getting arrested along with the Occupy Homes movement. And, you and I had spoken to each other before that.
Mhm.
You knew that you were probably going to get arrested, and that was a choice
Yeah, we
that
took our kids
that
to the zoo that day, like, earlier in the day.
you know,
Like
and so that was a strategic choice that you and other organizers had made, and I've been part of things like that as well.
mhm,
This was a little different. Again, there's things that I just can't or shouldn't say, but this group of 60 folks that got arrested was a group of folks that did not, for the most part, know each other ahead of time and had not gotten on the freeway with the intention of getting
mhm,
arrested. The police were really escalating something that seemed potentially violent with a primarily black group, and some white-bodied individuals were called upon to make themselves sort of a barrier,
Mhm.
and to absorb whatever might happen. I was part of that group, and we were the ones who were arrested. As they're handcuffing us and loading us into buses and carting us out of there, those of us who have done something like this before are assuming that we know the drill. We're going to spend the night in jail, and they're going to charge us with a misdemeanor like disturbing the peace. But instead, we spent 4 days in jail. They had the entire facility on lockdown. They had us in isolation from the general population and from each other. And
So hold on. Something I want to be clear about. So
Mhm,
the group that the group took to the freeway to block the freeway. That was a mostly black group. That there was like a slice of white
mhm,
homies that were like part of that.
that's right.
So then the white homie, when the police showed up, the white homies went to the front to basically say like, okay, they're gonna see us first. And so were the majority of people that got arrested, was that a majority white
Almost
group of
entirely
people?
white. That's right.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. And so when we finally are released,
Mhm.
we find out that we have many more charges and much more serious charges than you would normally expect to face for something along those lines.
Mhm.
And not only that, but the narrative that's been building in the news is that we were violent and out of control, that we were attacking police, that we were throwing, like cinder blocks at police. Just these things that just don't represent reality. And this single incident and these arrests have become sort of a flashpoint that everybody has opinions on. But
Mhm.
what we also find out is that Philando Castile's cousin, Lewis Hunter, who my understanding is that he really was not of that protest culture.
Mhm.
He was just his cousin. He heard that because of his cousin getting shot, some people were showing up
Yeah.
for a thing. So he
Yeah.
showed up to check it out and to support. He did not step foot on the freeway.
Mhm.
All evidence points to him really not doing anything except milling about a little bit and then leaving. And while the 60 of us were facing these trumped up charges and way more of them than we would have expected, and we're potentially looking at a year and a $3,000 fine for the most serious of those charges, for some reason, they targeted him and he alone was given a felony.
Mhm.
Almost immediately, his life fell apart because of it. He lost his job. Because of losing his job, he lost his truck, which meant that his side hustle, which was gardening, was no longer something he was able to do. He lost his housing, all because
What's
they
his name?
Lewis Hunter.
Lewis
And
Hunter.
so the piece of this story that I'm the most interested in talking about, because there were lots of people, that was just a period of time in Minneapolis where a lot of people were taken to the freeway, a lot of people were protesting. A lot of white-bodied people were happy to put themselves in dangerous situations
Mhm.
where they were risking arrest. None of that is unusual. The fact that the one that I was a part of kind of became a flashpoint is interesting, but wasn't really my doing.
Mhm.
The piece of this to me that's really interesting
Mhm.
is related to Lewis Hunter because what ended up happening is that this group of 60 people, they knew that they had overcharged us. It was a classic throw everything at them and then they'll all plead down to, riot charges or disorderly conduct charges or whatever. And collectively, we had a conversation. We met with our legal counsel and we made the decision that none of us were going to walk away from this until Lewis Hunter got to walk away from it. And
Mm.
so we began meeting twice a week. And for months and months, we put together a legal strategy and just sort of a communication and organizing strategy that allowed us to stand together, refuse to negotiate, refuse to cop any pleas, and essentially jam up the legal system in St. Paul
Mhm.
until they agreed to drop the charges against Lewis.
Mhm.
At the same time, we were leading actions to raise awareness. We were leading fundraising to help him with his legal fees. And eventually we won, and they dropped every charge against him, and he walked free. He has since opened a plant-based restaurant in uptown Minneapolis called Trio that's popular, and he
Oh,
seems to
that's
be
him.
doing that's him. And
Crazy.
yeah.
I've heard a lot about Trio. I haven't been there yet. So, I mean, you and I both know that the majority of people that listen that, like, came to our shows, listen to our music, and listen to this podcast, the ones that are white have a sense there is something very wrong happening in this society, and it should be addressed, and there's a variety of ways of looking at that. But we do have people, and I think some of them see it in a similar way and maybe would show up for it in a similar way that we would.
Mhm.
But then there are others that don't see it that way at all. And in terms of the way that they process things and the assessment that they make of their observations of what's happening in the political landscape is very, very different. And so people end up in, positioning themselves. And I think on a heart level, there's a lot that's very similar. And that's why I'm really happy to be in conversation with people and to try to keep people around. Cause I think on a heart level, like the best of these people are loving people who know that something is wrong and would like to be part of the solution, and they're
Yeah.
willing to be unpopular for it, and they're willing to, but we have people that, for example, would look at a phrase like Black Lives Matter. That phrase is just like the symbolic phrase of the last decade
Right.
that means something very specific to people on one side of the conversation, and it means something wildly different to people on the other side. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And I know this because there's a guy who converted to Islam with me, a white brother that I love, who, went to prison at one point and was in a white gang in prison. And one of the early conversations we had is that, the phrase Black Lives Matter to him was something that is the creation of media. Like the idea that he has of Black Lives Matter is like he learned about it through the media.
Right.
It was very specific individuals in LA that had a big organization and a lot of funding and a whole story and all types of different, controversies and things like that. And so one of the early conversations that we had is like, man, that's not what that phrase meant to the people around the world that say it.
Mhm.
That has nothing to do with, so, like, when you were talking about the leadership of, like, the people that shut down I don't know if they'd want us to say their names or not, but we know their names,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And the people in our community know their names, and, like, we love them and admire them, respect them.
That's right.
But the people that shut down the precinct in 2015 were, like, Black women in their 20s
Mhm.
who did not have a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization, never saw a penny for what they did, were never trying to be famous.
Right.
Me and you didn't learn about these things on the news. And the other white people that are on the bridge with you, you know what I mean? They didn't learn about it on the news. To us, it's like for people that are seeing it from that perspective, from a real lived perspective, it's like very clearly Black lives don't matter. You know what I'm saying? So that's a response to that. And so I think it's a good opportunity because I don't know if we've ever had the chance to address it on this particular platform. You know what I mean? But then also, I think it's really good that people get to hear from somebody who's not me about like what that really is like. You know what I mean? And from somebody like you who also is like, you didn't go make a blog about this and
Mhm.
you weren't advertising and you weren't trying to be in the spotlight and all in the video and
Mhm.
you know what I mean? And that there are other people like you. And then another piece, I'm sorry, I'm just talking and talking, but like another piece of this thing, there are other mostly white people that show up in these situations just because there's some chaos going on. And like they're angry and frustrated. Like people call them anarchists, and that's not always fair because there are people that identify as anarchists that would never do stuff like this. You know what I mean? I've actually just somebody reached out to me as like, hey, I identify as an anarchist. I never would have tried to burn down the library. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, you know what? That's fair. I gotta adjust that these are people that self-identify as anarchists. Somebody was like, I would never lump you in with ISIS. Don't lump me in with the people that show up in a Black Lives Matter protest and want to destroy stuff, just because they might also espouse themselves as anarchists, like, but there are other people that show up, white body people mostly, that show up and they got a similar haircut to you. To the police, their tattoos don't look different.
Mhm.
To the police, their profile doesn't look different. Like, I remember being in South Minneapolis during the George Floyd stuff, and I wasn't worried about protesters at all.
Right.
I was worried about police, and I was worried about white people in vans with the plates pulled off that were trying to burn down people's houses, that tried to burn down the library,
Yeah,
that tried to burn down, and, like, these people have nothing to do with Black Lives Matter.
that's right.
Um, but I feel like I remember an element of that situation that you were in, that particular one, because you've been up to bat with this stuff multiple times,
Yeah.
without ever having talked about it publicly, made a thing about it. But weren't there other folks like that in that situation, and that were making it difficult, like confusing for the police or complicating matters for you?
Um, there's elements of that everywhere. I mean, the first time that I encountered that was in protests against the war in Iraq, the second war in Iraq.
Mm,
I was newish to Minneapolis and didn't have that many connections or like just know the history of different organizations, and so I showed up at all the protests and showed up to lots of the different planning meetings and ran into folks who were deeply committed, but to me seemed more interested in destruction
mhm.
than in um
Building and organizing
yeah.
power, and yeah.
Yeah, than actually doing things that were strategically designed to create the changes or the leverage or the whatever, that we had determined was most important at this time.
Mhm,
And similarly on the ground, I have a really distinct memory of being at, downtown Minneapolis at the city building, and we had sort of one thing planned and we were doing it, and I heard somebody yell, "They're arresting people over on the other side. Come on, let's go." And it was very clear in his
mhm.
voice that it wasn't that, "Come on, people on the other side need our support," or, "There's an emergency," or "Shift in tactics." It was
Right,
it
right,
was
right.
like it was like yelling "We" on a ride. It was you know what I'm saying? It was like, "There's an
Yeah.
opportunity to get arrested."
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and I mean, I was like, I showed up here willing to get arrested, but in what way did we build a strategy for what happens next after arrest? How are we going to leverage that to mean
Yeah,
anything?
it's not for the arrest selfie.
Like yeah, exactly. Like you're just looking for a fun story. Like you just want,
Mhm,
you're so sad that you missed the 60s and 70s and now you want some stripes to put on your jacket. Um and there's an element of that that exists when you're in primarily white justice spaces,
mhm.
but there are, equally there are also people in this movement who you and I both know, white-bodied people who I deeply respect, and including people who I
Absolutely.
who I view as elders, who just have different analytical reads of what is called for.
Yeah.
Um, and I've gotten into conflict, like respect.
Different analytical reads for what's called for. You
Yeah.
might start hearing me say that on the podcast, or some version of it.
um, I mean, my wife's best friend's older brother, who is somebody who
Mhm,
was part of the Baldies, a
mhm.
legendary Minneapolis anti-racist street gang that organized specifically to confront head-on fascists and skinheads, which were scenes that were bubbling up in the Twin Cities,
Yeah.
to fight when necessary and to literally chase them out of town and let them know that racism and fascism weren't gonna be tolerated here.
And that was in
Um,
the '80s and '90s, right?
that's right, and then help to found the generations of organizers that come after them.
Yeah.
These are people who have paid enormous prices with their
Yeah.
body and with their freedom, and
Yeah.
done things that are so courageous that I hope that I could live up to them if I were in that position, but I'm not even sure if I would. but all of that being so these are people who I respect immensely and treat as
Mhm.
elders, but, who, for example, at the 4th precinct after Jamar Clark,
Mhm.
got into respectful conflict with because we had different reads on what was happening
Yes.
and, tactical decisions that were being made, who would have to pay the price for them if the police
Yes.
responded to them in certain ways.
And those are lessons that you learned by experience.
Yeah, sometimes from making most of the lessons that I've learned from screwing up and then vowing to never do that again. Yeah, you know.
And most of your friendships, most of your deep friendships are in that world are people who were had proximity to you, uh, like trying in good faith and in sincere desire to do something good and making a mistake in a way that might have made things difficult for them,
Mhm.
but just I'm talking about like our black teachers and mentors
Yeah.
that have seen you do stuff that are like, hey man, yeah, if that would have went bad, I would have been the one that would have paid the consequence for it, but you're such a G, man, I love you, man. You know what I'm saying? But hey man, like, but man, that spirit that you got, man, and then also one of the things I learned from watching you is like it didn't take you any time to like the second that that those things were pointed out to you, there were no tears, there were no like, "I'm just, in a world that I don't
Yeah.
control." Like, it was just like, "You know what? Yep, I messed up. Okay, I feel you. Won't do that again." You know what I'm saying? Like, your ability to get straight to the, "Oh, I actually there's a whole part of this that I didn't see because of the way that I'm situated in society."
Mhm.
And, "Yeah, man, I messed that one up pretty good. So, alright, what do we do next?" And, like, the love that that engenders in people around you, you know what I'm saying? That's just like, okay, it's a proof of sincerity. It's like there's a sincerity there. And, like, this person isn't doing this because like, it can't be because there's like it can't be for charity. It can't be because, like, "I'm doing this for you guys, man." It's gotta be like, "Hey, I'm not free either."
Yeah.
Like, I'm unfree in a very, very different way, you know what I'm saying? But, like, this is like, man, Chaplain Shane Atkinson, Imam Shane Atkinson was like, "Yeah, it's privilege in one sense," but he's like, "This is destroying my soul."
Yeah, that's right.
Like, my soul is sick, and I know that there is something wrong with me because of what's been happening in in this sea that I'm also been
Yeah.
swimming in for
Yeah.
all these years.
You and I, shortly after, I stopped touring with you, so after 10
Mhm.
years of being each other's shadow and just being stuck in vans and stuck in backstages and stuck in hotel rooms together, we finally had a break from each other. And the first thing that we did is we both signed up to be part of the same cohort, the same like racial justice organizing cohort that our friend Shaka and his wife had
Yeah.
organized. And this was like
The legendary I Self Divine.
that's right. And this is a long, like, sustained commitment. One of the things that I learned that was really challenging for me in that class was
Mhm.
the concept that you just named. This was one of the final hooks that white liberalism from the 90s had in me still, was this idea of, why do you show up to these things? Why are you here? Because this is what good people do. You know what I'm saying? We were taught in this cohort that it's essential for you to be able to identify your self-interest in freedom, in the goals that you're organizing around. I found that I was actually really resistant to that idea. It went against the way that my mom had raised me. This idea of, yeah, this idea of service, this idea of, you show up selflessly only to serve. And that way that she taught me certainly helped me with some of what you're describing, that ability to be a little bit selfless, to shed your ego and your self-involvement and be willing to take hard criticism. And the truth is that even after all these years, my first response is a defensive one. It just is. I have a reflexive defensiveness that I'm working so hard on shedding. but it's just really ingrained in there. But pretty quickly, once that comes and passes, I really am able to see like what is called for here, what is needed, and how can I best be of service.
Yeah.
And I
You know,
kind
and
of
now
wandered
that's
around in my answer
yeah,
there,
no,
but
we're kind of moving around, but I think this is really good though, man, because this is the first time that we had a conversation like this, and it's one of the things that I think we really set out to do with this podcast that we haven't really done as much of yet. You know what I'm
mhm,
saying? Which is like shed light on some of this particular stuff. So yeah, so that particular idea of self-interest, I mean that's a Saul Alinsky, um, a very particular view. You know what I mean? That language comes directly from him.
mhm,
That's not a view that I share with him.
mhm,
But and I come at this from a faith-based perspective that says the human being is inherently good, a human being is inherently just, a human being is inherently altruistic in their best of who they are. But it's not bad to look at the self-interest. I think that is an important thing because of the fact that a human being also has an ego. You know what I'm saying? And that's always going to be at play.
yeah, well,
But it doesn't.
yeah,
But
and I think
mm,
also though that, I also don't really identify with the Saul Alinsky model, and Saul Alinsky was really built heavily into that program that you and I were part of. Uh, what I will say though that I took away from that is this idea that it's not if you show up and the only fuel in your back is this is the right thing to do. It's easy to get either diverted or to just burn out, and also that there may be a piece of it that isn't being completely self-honest, and that finding self-interest doesn't mean find what piece of this is selfish. There's actually a sort of important connective tissue that you're searching for there.
mhm,
That idea
mhm.
of my liberation is bound up in your liberation. It forces you to get there, but to like do the math, like show your work, at least if you're
Mhm.
doing it right. Um, but there was just some piece of it that rubbed up against like one last little bit of like 90s white liberalism that was still stuck in me, that had like a kind of a charity thing about it or something.
Yeah, it can't be and I mean and yeah, ultimately like the idea that like even charity is ultimately for me because I'm acquiring all my charity and I what my soul is ultimately will what the truest essence of me is going to be directly connected to the things that I do. I'm a little more on your mom's side than I am on Saul Alinsky's side. That's all. But all that being said, I thought this was an important detour to make, not only because of how much I love tangents and like how great I think they are, but but like man, some of the best lessons, some of the best moments of everything are in the tangents.
Absolutely.
But also just to shine a light into the fact that every time human beings come together, um, there's all of these different things at play, and that's why I love so much the language that you said of like there are people that have a different analysis about what's called for
Mhm.
strategically or even in the realm of virtue. There's like a certain, and that's why I was talking about at the level of intellect, we have to have certain frames, and like those frames aren't always going to line up. But if we're connected on a heart level, whatever we're doing. One of my versions of like, "Hey, we're all getting arrested," is that the time that you mentioned when we made the decision for some of the people that were dealing with Occupy homes to get arrested.
Mhm.
Um, I went to jail with some really cool people. Um, David Gilbert Peterson, who's like worked on a lot of great campaigns and stuff like that, and we shouted him out on the Ilhan Omar
Yeah.
episode because he works closely with her. But me and him went to jail together, actually both wearing "I Self Divine" T-shirts.
That's
We
awesome.
hadn't planned it, but we but we both had on "Sound of Low Class
Mhm.
America" T-shirts on when we went to
That's
jail.
great.
But there was this young white dude in there, and like initially when we just got into the holding area, like we were all together. We weren't under the same lockdown conditions you were under. It was like just regular civil disobedience protocol. So then these two young black brothers came in and like they had been arrested for being young and black. Like it was very
Mm.
obvious. Like I'm like, oh. You
I
know what I
see where
mean?
this is going.
I was just about to like they were kinda looking at us, and I was just about to be like, "Oh, man, what kind of traffic offense they get you for?" Like, it just had that feeling of, like, 2 young
Yeah.
guys out minding their business. I was like, "I've seen it 100 times." It's like, "Oh, what you were you drove in the suburbs after dark? What happened? You got a white girl in the
Going
car? What"
55 and a 54.
You know what I'm saying? So before I could say something, this dude turns to them and says, "You're probably wondering why we're here."
Uh,
Yeah, we were doing civil disobedience. And they looked at him like, "What?" And he was like, "Oh, we were protesting."
oh god.
And I'm just thinking like, and I was like, "Hey man," so I pulled him to the side and I said, "Hey, basically what you just told those guys, these two young black men is you guys are supposed to be in
You
jail
belong here and we
and
don't.
we don't.
Yeah.
So you're probably wondering." I said, "First of all, don't nobody give a damn who you are or why you're here. These guys are in jail.
Yeah.
They don't care who you are or why you're here. They
Yeah.
don't thinking about you.
For real.
You know what I'm saying?" But I'm like, "Man," and he cried and then he tried to
Uh,
apologize to the guys. I said, "Man, these guys have nothing to do with this. This is you. Like this is your stuff. This is your narrative in your head." And I'm like, also, these people, these guys are here and you wanted credit from them. You wanted props from them.
yeah.
Like you wanted them to know that you were there. And I'm like, I said, "Man, your way of thinking about all of this, you have more in line with the police than you do with the movement in this moment. Like you're trying to score points off of this joint."
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the path of the white ally, there are many places to trip and stumble. There's so much potential for damage, small and large. And there's no guidebook, you know, um, and there's not we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but there's not a lot of culture or conversation or just
Right.
places for white folks to check in with each other. There are some attempts, there's places like Surge, what is that? Showing Up for Racial Justice, that are very much intended to be the beginnings of things like that. But there's no way to do this consistently and wholeheartedly without stumbling and making some really stupid mistakes. And that's true in your first year, and it's true after 10 years. The mistakes just look different.
Mhm.
Another big thing that I took away from the experience with Speak, the cohort that you and I were a part of, is that was a time where I was working hard to sort of decenter myself as a white person, especially in spaces that were predominantly black and brown and native. And a mistake that I think I was making was doing that so much that I wasn't really risking anything anymore. In other words, showing up in spaces where there was potential for me to say the wrong thing and being overly safe. And it came from a place of I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want
Right.
to say, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to say
Right.
the wrong thing. This is their space. This
Yeah.
I'm a visitor here. But you can come
Right.
into a
But it turned
territory.
into like a supportive, a supportive service-based, quietist Brendan.
And part, if you really want to be, there's no good words. All of the words that I'm using are words that I cringe as I say. So please know that. But there just aren't
Yeah.
great words for any of this. But like to be
They
a
are, but they're in Arabic, but that's my thing.
okay. Well, I certainly don't know those ones. Um, but like to be a good ally in part means being willing to publicly mess up big, and take it, and not spend a bunch of time explaining yourself or centering yourself in the cleanup, just taking your licks. Go.
Or emotionally punishing the people who tell you the truth.
Oh, yes, there's a
And
lot
I
of
mean,
that.
that's like that's one of the like that's seems to be like a go-to white social justice thing is when somebody is told like, "Hey, what you just actually did there was just really it just threw a monkey wrench in things. You were disrespectful to people. You know," and then to cry
Yeah,
and to be like, well, I am,
man.
and to basically
I got
emotionally
no patience for
it's a type of
any of
emotional
that.
abuse. If you do that in a like if you do that in your marriage, you are emotionally
That's right.
abusive. If your partner says to you, like, "Hey," if you're out here like DMing other people about how sexy they are, that's messed up. That's like disrespectful to me. And you're like, "I can't have that." I mean, that's narcissistic, emotionally
Yeah,
abusive behavior
that's right.
that a lot of a lot of colorless people from the outer city, from outer city tribes, it's very, very common, man.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing that is it's important to be aware of. Therapy, 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 therapy. Time to talk about therapy. One of the things about being a human being is that the stuff that's worst for us, that harms our health, that harms us, a lot of times that stuff is really yummy to us. And we're just built like that. It's one of the challenges of the human condition. And on the flip side, a lot of times the stuff that's most healing for us, that's best for us, is just really distasteful until you start doing it. And then and it's the weird ego thing that the ego is like, "Don't do that." You know what I'm saying? Don't cut out sugar. Don't start eating healthy. Don't go to the gym. But then the second you go to the gym, your ego starts being like, Yes, everyone should go to the gym." And so you know what I'm saying? You take a little photo of your workout or something, and then you make a post on social media trying to be motivational for other people to go to the gym. It's corny, but all of this is part of who we are. And if therapy is one of those things that a lot of times we don't want to do it because it's good for us in ways that's really easy to push back against. Like, no, you don't, I don't got to tell some stranger all my stuff. Okay, you're going to tell your stuff to somebody. You know what I'm saying? Chances are you're posting about other people on social media, you're complaining to your significant other, you're talking about somebody behind their back. You got all these conversations. I've had a year of arguing with somebody in my head, and they win every argument. I don't know why. You know what I'm saying? And then I saw this person, and they don't even know that they have said horrible things to me over the past year that they'd never actually said. It's just in my mind, I've been doing this. We all are focusing on the stuff that we're uneasy and unsettled about. You know what I'm saying? Whether it might be horrific traumas in our life, it might just be the normal stuff of going through life, but you're getting this stuff out some kind of way, and it probably is not as healthy as it could be. Let's just say it like that. So I make music about this stuff, and it's really good for me to do, but therapy's different. I talk to my spiritual advisors about these things, and that's really good to do. But therapy's different. It's a it's like you take all of that energy that you would channel into, sub tweets and all this other mess, and you talk to a person who is intentionally there not to be your friend, not to be your buddy, not to be popular, but they're there for the sole purpose of how do we look at this in ways that are healing for you? How do we make this an intentional, productive conversation? So, yeah, talk to me about all the stuff that's bothering you, and it can be as petty as you want. But what we're gonna do is reframe it, reshape it, and you're gonna direct it. So these people are amazing. Like they're able to listen to what we say and then just repeat it back to us with a little twist on it, or maybe even ask us a question that gets us to think about it differently. It's incredible, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. But you're not gonna do it. But if you are, like if you do, so I say this all the time. I don't live in America and I don't have a job, so I can't just go get therapy the way that a lot of other people do. I heard about BetterHelp, BetterHelp, on a podcast. I use it. It's helped me tremendously. Um, It's just incredible. So if you go to betterhelp.com/travelers, that lets you know, I heard about this on Brother Ali's podcast. He keeps on telling me to go to therapy. He thinks something's wrong with me. He thinks I'm crazy. Let me see if that's true or not. But then when you do that, you'll get a discount and they also give us a commission. That's our partnership thing with them. Betterhelp.com/travelers. And then you do a questionnaire. You tell them why you're coming to therapy, and then you start making all kind of decisions immediately. That puts you in the driver's seat. What kind of therapist do I want to talk to? What kind of therapy do I think I might be interested in? What are good times to meet for me? Do I want to just text for a while? Do I want to talk on the phone? Do I want to turn the cameras on and see each other? All of that stuff. And if you ever want to switch your therapist, no hard feelings. You're just like, yeah, you're good, but I don't feel like you're my therapist. I've done that twice. I switched therapists twice. There was like a therapist that I'm like, this stuff is dope. If you wrote a book, I would read it. You're a very wise person, but you're not tailoring this. It doesn't feel like you're tailoring this to me. Like this is Ali's therapy, and this person should be listening to me and helping me unlock me specifically. It's like, man, if this therapist had a podcast, sign me up because I'm benefiting from what they're saying. But I need somebody who's here to serve me. And it's one of those times where being selfish, the more selfish we are, the better the outcome. It's one of the times that we're really, really, it's good to be selfish. So go to betterhelp.com/travelers and get down with this therapy journey and see if it helps you as much as it's helped everybody else has done it. I think people who aren't involved in activism, organizing, if you were to say to the average person, I'm an organizer, I'm an activist, I do community work, I think the part that they see is, the demonstration on TV.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They see like the part where the protesters clashed with police on Monday on da 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 da, or Malcolm X holding his finger up, and then all the brothers walk to the, and then no one man should have all that power.
Mm.
And that is the entrance point for a lot of people. And you do have a few lifers. Like definitely when you're around that scene, there are like some 65, 70-year-old people that you're like, yo, you have been protesting since you were 25 years old. But
Mhm.
that's very rare. Like most people transition into some other type of way of showing up for justice.
Mhm.
And like this is what the revolution is going to look like for me in my day-to-day life. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so your transition into community radio is one that I think is just really amazing. So I'm just curious, like, at what point did you realize that that was going to be one of the main focuses of your
Mhm.
life dedication work?
Well, it's not a path that I so much chose as one that was thrust upon me. You and I had our last year of touring together in 2009,
Hmm.
and in early 2010, my friend Steven Renderos, who now runs the Center for Media Justice, reached out to me and let me know about organizing work that he was about to begin around the goal of launching some new, like, micro radio stations here in the Twin Cities that were specifically going to be built for the purpose of amplifying the voices and stories that had historically been
Hmm.
misrepresented or underrepresented or erased in media spaces. So in early 2010, I attended some of the first meetings around this idea. And over the next several years, I was one of maybe 2 or 3 dozen people, some of them representing, community organizations or neighborhood groups, and some of them just community members like me who were passionate about this idea.
Hmm.
We would meet weekly and, over those years, did fundraising for the project,
Yeah.
um, met with a lot of engineers to figure out technical details, worked with the FCC to figure out compliance issues, put together an application that involved all this, impact and land use and, all these different scientific studies. Did a lot of work to just sort of raise awareness and interest around this idea, and spent a lot of time just dreaming up what new models for radio might look like. We turned in our application in 2015, and in 2016, we were approved and given a provisional license, which basically meant that we had about a year and a half to build and launch the station and get on the air. And that if we could do that, then we could be an official radio station. If we missed that deadline, if we fell short, if we didn't meet certain requirements about how much programming there was and where it was coming from and X, Y, and Z by a certain date that would come up very quickly for us, then we would miss the opportunity and there would never be another one. It was at this point that the lead organizers of the project let me know that they wanted me to be the one to build the physical infrastructure of the station, the studios, putting together all the equipment and
Mhm.
building the transmitter and the tower. They wanted me to be the one to recruit and train all the people who would be on air and would be volunteers behind the scenes. And they wanted me to be the one to then run the station. They wanted me to take over this project to launch and run a new radio station in South Minneapolis. I was initially really reluctant to this idea. It was my very clear understanding that we were building this radio station for a number of different marginalized communities and that I wasn't a member of any of those communities.
Mm.
It did not make sense to me for me to be in charge of this project. But it was eventually made clear to me that I really was the best person for the job at that time and in that place. I had this really unique intersection
Yeah.
of skills and
Mhm. Mhm.
experiences and relationships and resources
Man, and what a gift
and
that is.
to be able to recognize that or
Yeah, I mean, like, how often do people really get a chance? Like, I
mm,
think there are so many. It's a gift, and it's also it's not a curse. It's not a curse at all. But it's there. There's a huge obligation. But so many
yeah.
people that I talk to are like, man, you're so fortunate that you know what you want to do, and you know what you want to be, and like what your mission is.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's even more true than you might realize because yes, with the radio station, there was real power in feeling and understanding of this is the seat that I'm supposed to be sitting in. This is the work that I'm supposed to be doing. But on another level, after decades of doing justice work and organizing and protesting and fighting, it can be easy for a sense of powerlessness and
Mhm.
helplessness to overcome you
Mhm.
because these things that you're fighting against are so big and powerful and entrenched and go back generations and centuries and were planted with
Mhm.
intention and care to be entangled and thorny and to protect themselves. And you can become overwhelmed with a sense of, you know, where do I even fight? What do I even do? Like, how do I make a change? And the radio license that we got, these low power FM licenses, by definition, have some really big limits built into them. You know, your tower, your antenna can only be 100 feet tall. Your signal can only be 100 watts strong. And in radio terms, that means that you're sending out a relatively weak signal. At the beginning, really for the first several years that we were organizing this project, our understanding was that we were really going to be broadcasting just to the Phillips neighborhood. And so a lot of the planning, a lot of my thinking was very much rooted in this one neighborhood. In actuality, when we flipped the switch and turned on the transmitter and started broadcasting, really it covers South Minneapolis and it spills into downtown. And there's parts of North Side and even St. Paul where you can hear this and some of the suburbs. So it is a lot bigger than what we thought. But in all of the initial work and really in my work of launching the station, the understanding was this is a neighborhood radio station and what that means is that all of these values that you say you're fighting for, all of these intentions that you're building the radio station for, they're not generic anymore. They're not these big, broad ideas.
Mhm.
You can draw a circle on the map
Mm.
and say, I want to deliver this to these specific people. So you go from this place of feeling a sense of powerlessness and a real uncertainty about what am I supposed to do to suddenly knowing
Uh-huh.
exactly what you're supposed to do.
Right.
So, for example, The Phillips neighborhood is the most densely populated neighborhood in all of Minnesota. It's also one of the lowest incomes. It is simultaneously home to a number of different first generation communities. It's sort of a landing pad for recent arrival groups. But also, it's home to the largest urban Native American population in the whole country. It's home to the Native Cultural Corridor, where several decades ago, the American Indian movement
Mhm.
chased off all the bars, all the liquor stores. There was a porn theater there,
Yeah,
ran them
man.
all off the block, and in their place, planted the seeds that would grow into art galleries and community centers
Mhm.
and healthcare clinics and a credit union that was built specifically to help launch other native owned businesses.
Mhm.
This is just 2 blocks away from the studio that we're building. So, all these amazing things are happening in this neighborhood, and you've got this rich community
Mhm.
filled with tradition and history and stories. But if you turn on the radio, and you scan the entire FM dial, the entire AM dial, and you listen 24 hours a day for an entire week across all those stations and all that time, there is 1 hour of native led programming. 1 hour, which is just insulting, especially when you consider there are different tribes here. There are different generations here. There are different
Right.
lived experiences here. There are
Yeah,
folks
people
from the
that are from the
res.
city, people from Little Earth are very different culturally than people from the
Right.
rest. Like, it's 2 completely different worlds. So, yeah, to have one
So
thing that like, "All right, now you speak for
Yeah, to have
everybody."
one radio
Yeah.
program with 1 hour with one voice that's meant to represent all of that is just ridiculous. And so when we launched as a radio station,
Mhm.
suddenly the Twin Cities went from having 1 hour a week to having 13 hours a week. And that was just our opening shot. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Our opening program schedule, over the course of a week, we were broadcasting content in 6 different languages. There was content in English, Spanish, Somali, Hmong, Haitian Creole, and Ojibwe. There was content about everything from mental health and entrepreneurship and community organizing, education, relationships, sexuality, language, history, politics, and then just tons of great music.
Mhm.
There was hundreds of hours of youth-led segments, whole blocks of the weekly schedule that were set aside just for youth.
One of the things I just want to interject here, man, is that, I think when you talk about a project like this, and especially the way that you're talking about it, because it deserves to be spoken about in this like comprehensive way. But I think that somebody may think that when you're listening to a radio station like that, it's going to be all in this kind of language that you're using now. But I'm saying like that, it's like, these are like youth from the community playing their favorite music and making jokes about each other and like playing around. And like you can hear people like I remember one time listening to the radio station, these guys were like flicking rubber rubber bands at each other and like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's fun. Like that it
Yeah.
was like genuine. You always think about like you get all these different people in the room with an intention to just be human and talk about the things that matter to you.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And then what comes out of it is like a different radio culture than what you're
That's
used
right.
to hearing. You know what I'm saying? Also like the overall vibe that comes from hearing those conversations, and also for people hearing themselves on the radio. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Being broadcast to the whole city, and you don't have to learn to do radio speak and all of this other kind of stuff, but to just like, no, you just like you are, and whatever you think is important, you know what I mean, to talk about. It brings a element of life and just realness and like humanity that you don't get otherwise. It's like it's got a feeling to it that's like, this is
Mhm.
real. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like this is almost like if you were to put microphones in somebody's kitchen
Well, what
sometimes.
I would often say is that I wanted the station to sound like a walk through the neighborhood. What it would sound like to walk
Mm,
through the Phillips neighborhood. You would hear things in
mhm,
multiple languages. You would hear things that you know and instantly recognize and love that bring out like nostalgic feelings in you. You would also
Mhm.
hear things that you're not quite familiar with, but kind of catch your ear. Like, what is that? I might need to hear more of that. And you'd hear some things that aren't for you because not everything is for you, you know?
Imagine that.
So,
Imagine the idea that not everything is for me.
something that I wanted to
Yeah.
touch on because I think it's really interesting and it's, you know, there exist even in the Twin Cities other really good community radio stations. And,
Mhm.
one of them here has decades of experience of putting voices on the air that you can't hear otherwise. But
Mhm.
when you look at the schedule, it's very much like this is the hour for Native American folks. This is the hour for Somali folks. This is the hour for
Right.
Francophiles who want to hear music in French.
It feels like the meeting room at the library. It feels like somebody
1000%.
signed the meeting room out for an hour, and then, like, during that time, that's their meeting
Yeah. And when you
scheduled,
look at
and
the programming schedule, where those hours are,
Mhm.
they feel very much, with all due respect, because really I do have so much respect for the history that those radio stations have
Of course.
and the work that they've put in and
Yeah.
how revolutionary even
Mhm.
having those slots were at the time when they were first introduced.
Mhm.
But you look at the programming schedule and it feels like those slots are a burden. Like that Somali hour is like, where are we going to put this?
Mhm.
Like here's the folk hour that goes into the bluegrass hour that goes into the blues hour. Those are smooth transitions. Now, where are we going to stick this Somali hour that's going to be a monkey wrench in everything else? You know what I mean? And so they're put in these places in the programming schedule where it feels like
Mhm.
they're trying to get them out of the way.
They check a box.
It's checking a box, it's filling a duty, and it's an important duty, and again, I'm glad they do it, but it just never felt like this is a part of a holistic thing that we're presenting.
Mhm.
Um,
Right, that's
and
right, yeah.
and when you're in a community, that is what this is.
Yeah.
The Somali folks, that are going up in the elevator in the towers with me are having a conversation that I'm not a part of, but we all live in this tower together.
Right.
And if I keep leaving my trash in the hallway, other people are gonna have something to say about it. Like, we're all part of something together.
Right. Or if somebody else does it, you're like, "Damn, you smell that?" You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like a yeah, there's a shared yeah.
Yeah.
How long so from the time that you I mean, I just remember there was a long period where I just had this sense that you were, like, scratching and clawing and, like, trying to make this thing come to life,
Mhm.
like and I wasn't aware of, like, what all the moving pieces were.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, you were just in a fight that I didn't fully understand. Like, I knew what the
Yeah.
mission was, but, I mean, I just remember you trying to get a space and get equipment and get the staff and get the building and get the you know what I mean? Like, it felt to me like you were doing everything from, like, setting up IKEA furniture to, helping, with programming and getting
Yep.
doing the electrical work and, like, it really felt like I know there was a team behind it, but
Mhm.
you being the person that spearheaded it, like, how long was that process from the point where you had the idea and were clear, that moment of clarity that you
Mhm.
described, to the point where it felt like this thing is up and running? What was that how long was that period, and what was that period
Yeah.
like?
Well, so like I said, the first 5 years, I was not really the leadership. I was a volunteer who was showing up as part of a group, working on a very big project that sounded exciting to me. So that first 5 years,
Mhm,
was very easy personally. Then I got asked to head up the launch of the station, and roughly speaking, that's about 2.5 it's about 2 years, maybe a little more than 2 years, and
mhm,
that work, um, at the time felt like by far the hardest and biggest work I had ever done in my life, and then we got the radio station on the air, and I was completely unprepared for the way in which my job was going to change
mhm,
and how much the work would be and how intense that work would be and how nonstop. I mean, it was just like turning a fire hose on. And it went from being what I thought was the hardest work I'd ever done to being way more that I could handle, like literally overnight. Once the
Mm.
radio station was on the air, I was playing the role of station manager, program director, volunteer coordinator, the head of fundraising. For the first 2 years, I wrote all the curriculum and led all of the youth programming across, I think, 7 different middle and high schools.
That's crazy.
Um, we didn't yet have a base of listeners to be our donors, and so I really relied on basically hiring myself out, to do contract work. So I was putting together pitch materials for that, going out, like, just hitting the pavement, kind of like almost door to door, selling services, and then being the person fulfilling those services. I mean, I was
Mhm.
working 70 to 80-hour weeks every single week for about two and a
So,
half
like, to
years.
raise money for the station, you would offer to, like, "Hey, if you're doing a thing, I can come and record it for you, and I can edit it for you, and I can, like, make." I remember that was one of the services you were offering at one
Yeah.
time, or I can, like, come help get your sound system
Yep.
cracking for you. You're basically doing, like, the radio version of Odd Jobs.
Yeah. I helped the Girl Scouts to launch a podcast. I went into schools and led clubs, for hire almost, like radio and
Mhm.
podcast clubs for hire. I drove all across the state recording meetings and listening sessions, getting hired to record like debates during campaign season.
Mhm.
Just all kinds of different work. And like I said, eventually, with all of this, I couldn't have done that kind of work over that period of time if I didn't have a vision for what the other side of it looked like.
Mm,
But
mhm.
it was all in service of building the capacity of the radio station to grow and eventually outgrow me.
Yeah,
I was really torn when they asked me if I would do this work, if I would lead this work.
yeah.
um, I had been very, very clear from the beginning that there was a number of different communities that we were doing this for, and I didn't feel like I fit into any of them, you know? And so why was I gonna head this up? For me to make myself okay with saying yes, I had to build into it what the off ramp looked like. For me to say, yes, I will lead this work from the beginning, I needed to say, and I will know that my part of the work is done when these, 3 or 4 boxes get checked off. And at that
So you're
point,
saying, like, this was
it's
a
time for me to get
yeah,
out of the way. My
yeah.
last job in this role will be replacing myself. And I was vocal about that from the beginning to anybody who would listen. I said it often and loudly, I think mostly to keep myself accountable to it. And so a lot of the work, whether it be like governance work or fundraising work or programming work, the idea was like I'm trying to like wear a path into this grass, so that when it comes time for me to get out of the way,
Mhm.
things are already there. I'm trying to earn enough money for this radio station. I'm trying to build contracts that we can come back to year after year, relationships that we can, build off of year after year, that make it so that when the next person fills this chair, they have the budget to hire a team around them,
Mhm.
you know. But I was also really worried. I now had friends across the radio community in the Twin Cities, and I looked at the history, the trajectory of some of these other radio stations, and there were radio stations that I saw that launched with really idealistic goals and really radical people at the helm. And over time, the needs of who was in the community around them and the needs of the community and what it looked like to be radical in a media space shifted, but they sort of calcified themselves and their way into place, and it turned what used to be like a really amazing radical tool
Yeah, like relevant
into
living
an obstacle,
organism.
into like something
Yeah,
stuck in the
yeah,
way. And I was really
yeah,
aware that that could happen here if I stuck around too long, or if I made my fingerprints like too deep and too like at the core of things. So I wanted to make sure that I was building things strong enough that they could stand without me. Um, but get out of the way soon enough and leave things just malleable enough that the people who took over from me would have the ability to steer it in whatever direction felt right to them.
So just to be clear, like, a lot of times we talk about these things, but we're not always very specific. And I think that your specific understanding and intention is really important to highlight in a really specific way. So I've heard you talk about this radio station as being an anti-racist radio station. My understanding of that is that the way that media and including radio has been set up was under these, pretenses of maintaining the status quo, promoting certain ideas,
Right.
basically maintaining the power base. Specifically in this case, like that was used to silence non-white voices, anybody that wasn't from the dominant culture of white men that were straight and had money and
Right.
that whole thing. So the mission of this radio station and others like it was to fight against that by correcting it. This is gonna be a radio station where communities that have been left out are on the mic, they're choosing the music, and also ultimately in the driver's seat.
Mhm.
They're like, as a communal effort, this is not just gonna be one person. And so your thing with that the whole time is coming into this as a white man that's not when you say I just want to be specific
Yeah.
because we both know that there are people that listen to these conversations and they can creatively hear around stuff like that. But
Sure.
you were saying from the beginning that like I'm a white man, I'll be a servant. That's what I always witnessed you being a servant leader, where you're like, I am just the full-time servant of this
Mhm.
thing. I, as little as possible, want to dictate anything other than there are needs that need to be met, and I'm gonna do whatever I can in this role. And then ultimately, what you're describing is that kind of fine, delicate balance between being strong enough to survive you leaving, but also not needing to survive by refilling something that you determined.
Right.
And man, that's one of the dopest parts about the whole story to me. Like when I try to tell this story to people, it's like, man, because so often there are like white people that come into these spaces with really great intentions and don't realize the ways that they're actually forcing something in the very building of the structure. There's just like an inherent white dominator thing in the way that it's built or in the environment and atmosphere and
Mhm.
language and energy. There's just something about there's sometimes it's intangible. And you having been in those spaces over and over again and also recognizing the fact that if you were doing those things, you probably wouldn't see it,
Mm.
to basically like build in ways for your default settings to not become the default settings of the organization. I'm sure that there are people that do that. I've never been as up close.
Mm.
You're the first person that I heard name that very specifically with doing this work.
Yeah. Well, that was very much the intention. I can
Mhm.
identify, I can point to places where I made mistakes, and the effects may have been exactly the opposite, of those that I just named as my intentions. And so it's still even when you build a beautiful roadmap for yourself, even when you're really clear on what your intentions are, and you put in the work and you tune them up and you get them perfect, it's still messy work. It's still people button up against people. It's
Mhm.
still trauma running into trauma.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
something that's come up when we talked about wax poetics, it's something that's true that you encountered at Rhyme Sayers. And it's
And the
true
mosque that I went to and the organizations that I've been involved in and yeah.
when there's not enough people and there's a lot of urgency.
Mhm.
Sometimes people take shortcuts with just the very best
Yeah.
intentions in mind. Sometimes people
Mhm.
guard how the process can go
Yeah.
in the name of efficiency and getting it done.
Yes.
There's
Mhm.
just there's so many
Mhm.
ways to mess up and hurt people. And so I am really proud of the things that you just named. And I'm proud that I was able to recognize places that things could go wrong and to proactively work to keep them from going wrong. But just so that we're clear for the record, my great intentions did not always equal perfect results.
we always talk about the fact that like I come from the art world, the active organizing world, and the religious
Mhm.
world. And the artists, the artists are unique in that like the artists kind of get to mess up. You know what I mean? An artist can be like, "Hey, man, I'm an artist, man."
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? But something about religion and organizing, people are like, there's from the outside looking in, it's like these people are making a claim. You know what I'm saying? Because they're pointing out that things could be better. So like, there's this feeling that outsiders have. But man, in spiritual work and community work, the people that are lifers just live with the reality that everything that I'm working on, all of the things that I point out in the world that have been so detrimental to everybody and have poisoned the water, I grew up drinking and swimming in that water too.
Man.
So, like, I'm a product of all the stuff I'm talking about. So, when religious people talk about sin, it's because they know that they sin and they hate the fact that they
Mm.
sin. You know what I'm saying? The sincere
Mhm.
ones. You know what I'm saying? When sincere community organizing people and activists like talk about the challenges in the world, we know that we are as much a part of this problem as
Yeah.
anyone else. And so the only difference is trying to engage some sort of sustainable, systematic, intentionally stated attempt to right the ship as much as possible.
Yeah.
So your wife Julie is in her own right and on her own a legendary community figure that has worked in a number of different
Yeah.
capacities, really like keeping Weight House this like a really immensely important community organization alive and active and relevant and like this just like really incredible healing force. She's like a legendary juggernaut on her own.
Yes, she is.
That's a really important part of this that like just talking about her or with her can't just be a footnote to this story. So I'm almost like I almost don't even want to open that because like it can't
Mm.
just be like, oh, and
Mhm.
also this guy's wife is just
Yeah.
amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I say that to say that you guys chose to live in the neighborhood that ended up really being at the center of the things that happened around George Floyd, but more so specifically around the police that murdered him
Mhm.
and that system. And so what I the way that I remember it is that even during that time, you were in a service role. I remember you cleaning up trash. I remember you going out there when the cameras weren't there and cleaning up and cleaning people's yards and doing a lot of things that I probably don't even know about. But then after that, that seems to I feel like I remember you saying, "It's time for me to no longer be in the leadership seat in this radio station." Was that the moment for you?
Yeah, well, what's funny is that, like I said, I had known from the beginning that I was eventually going to get out of the way, and at the beginning, the things that were on the checklist were very tangible things. One of the things that will tell me that it's getting closer to time for me to leave
Mm,
is when our annual budget looks like this,
mm,
when our programming schedule looks like this, when
okay.
our governance looks like this, these
Mhm,
very like yes or no, did we meet this achievement?
mhm,
As you make your way through those tangible things, the last couple become a lot harder to define, and that they have to do with the soil being fertile, like the right people being in place. Part of the problem was if you're
mhm.
not able to hire a team around you, then it's hard to have somebody who is learning to man the reins. And that's a job that, for as much like as it is about vision, there is so much nuts and bolts, just, keep the trains running on time,
Right,
really important stuff that like the heart of what the station is grinds to a halt if these things don't get done. They're not the fun things.
right,
you know
right,
but
right.
like so who is learning those things so that when I step out of the way, everything is in place? I was really struggling with that piece of it, but I kept saying to myself, when the time is right, it will be apparent, you will
Mhm,
know. And after the early days of COVID and quarantine hit,
mhm.
the whole building was shut down. It's a publicly owned building that the studios are in, and it was shut down.
Mhm.
It wasn't a decision that we had any part in. We just no longer had access to our studios. Luckily, it had been part of our model of programming to go small from the beginning. And so we had a lot of portable equipment. And, in those early months of the pandemic, I was shuttling those all around the city, getting people recorded. All of that put us in perfect position to respond, even without a studio, to the murder of George Floyd and then the uprising that followed. That being said, um, there was growing tension around folks who felt an urgency to have their voices, live voices, show up on the radio, and a lot of anger around not having access to the studio. And so I started sneaking people in, a bit like sneaking you in in the early days of Radio K and Brother Ali. I started sneaking people in at odd hours and sort of surreptitiously advertising that we would have live programming. And so there were like healing sessions, guided meditations. There were some very angry hours of just community venting.
Mhm.
But it was a really, like, it was one of those moments where it's like, this is what we built this radio station for.
Right, yeah.
I went in a half hour early for one of these sessions, and I was in there by myself in this whole big community center. Somehow the silent alarm had been tripped. And in the
Yeah.
heightened environment of Minneapolis at that time, the police response was way out of proportion to what was needed. And a SWAT team descended on the community center. And I opened a door and found myself with a number of automatic weapons pointed at my chest and a lot of high energy instructions coming at me very quickly. It de escalated just as quickly as it started. Somebody, a white police officer who I had never seen before, and I'm fairly certain had never seen me before, said with absolute authority, "Oh, he works here." I didn't show any ID, and they just
Right.
left me alone and left the building. um, and I'm chuckling about the casual racism of that now, but I was really
Yeah, but I
acutely
mean, if that had
aware.
been one of your
The
DJs or
the
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 yeah, man.
all of the DJs who I was sneaking in were not by design, but I'm just thinking back, they were all dark-skinned, natural-haired Black women, with loud voices who were entering the studio with a lot of pain, and it was not hard to imagine a lot of different ways that that could have
Mhm.
gone.
Yes.
And I went home that night, and it wasn't in response to that happening. It was just that was like a catalytic um event. It set in motion like a chemical response in my body, and all of a sudden I just knew that it was time for me to get out of the way. I had been
That
saying,
day.
yeah, I had been saying um for years, I'll know when it's time, and all of a sudden it was time and I knew. And there were things that didn't feel finished. There was no clear person waiting in the wings to take over seamlessly. There were lots of questions, but all of a sudden, the answer to all those questions was really clear to me. And it was the solutions to those problems don't have enough air to breathe to come into being
That's
with
right.
you here with the steering wheel in your hands. You need to get out of the way even without every question answered to
Yeah.
create the
Yes.
conditions in which the next thing can emerge and thrive. And
Mhm.
that over time, I was tested. My faith in that being true was tested. The process of me getting out of the way, and specifically the next leader being selected and prepared, and that transition happening, it turned out to be messy and long and really difficult. But now, with the passage of time, looking back with 100% certainty, I can say that that was the right move, and that I was right. It took me not being there anymore to make it possible for the
Yeah.
next person to show up and be great.
I'm saying, like, I know you're not here to get congratulated, but I think it's important, just that, like, that's one of the things that I do when I interview people is tell them how great I think they are. But then also it's important because people are inspired by those things. And like there's always somebody who maybe aspires to certain things. And like most of us have never seen a lot of these things modeled or done before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But even without the racial element of this whole scenario, a person like we've seen this happen over and over and over again, where somebody spends a portion of their life or sometimes all of their life building something, and they pour all of their heart and soul over to it, and the idea of turning it over to somebody else who might mess it up,
Mm.
who wasn't there from the
Mhm.
beginning, you know what I mean, is such a terrifying
Yeah.
idea. Like to truly release something, you know what I mean? It's like, man, that's not what the ego likes. That's not what the part of ourselves that wants to be celebrated. Because like now this thing is going to keep on going and soaring. And who knows, the second I'm not there anymore, it might become a national story and all of this stuff. And I might be written out of this thing. And
Mm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just even on an organizational level and but that's what it takes to take a moment and turn it into an institution.
Yeah. The two people who really shaped my understanding of what success looks like in spaces like this are my wife, Julie,
Mm,
and our friend Shaka, I Self Define.
mhm.
Shaka, for as long as I've known him as an MC, has also been a community organizer.
Mhm,
And the very first lesson in community organizing that I have a memory of him sharing with me was that the best community organizers organize their way out of a job.
mhm.
I remember him saying that 20 years ago and that feeling like the most important thing I'd ever heard,
Yeah.
you know? And then I've watched almost 2 decades of my wife doing youth work, seeing like how inspiring she was and how she was helping these kids to get their needs met
Mhm.
and plan for the future and find their voice. Like I found all of that really inspiring. But when it really hit me was that when the following years came and you saw graduates come back to volunteer, and then you saw
Right.
volunteers turn into people who were doing entry level positions,
Uh-huh.
and then they emerge as leaders.
Right.
And, Julie has outgrown her position and moved into that, her job has had to build new jobs for her as she's outgrown desk after desk, and each one that she outgrows, she's filling with new people and mentoring them into becoming leaders. All of that has just modeled to me that, like, this is not a success if you build it up and then walk away from it and it collapse, or if you build it up and then hoard over it like it's your little kingdom.
Right.
That what success in this space looks like is not just building programs up, but building people up and building conditions up
Mhm.
that allow people to emerge as leaders and bring new things into the program.
Much love to my man BK1, one of my dearest friends. I don't think we did like a for real outro or like a proper goodbye. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're talking to somebody that you talk to once a year, you're like, "Man, I love you so much. I think about you all the time. I can't wait to see you again." I pray for people a lot of times. When you're talking to somebody that you talk to every day and the thought is like, "Man, we could just be kind of abrupt. It's like, all right, I gotta go. All right, all right, see if this is enough. If we got to record more, we'll do it later. All right, I'll let you. All right, peace. Cause it's like, man, I'm gonna call you in 20 minutes about something else or leave you a voice note or something. So we just didn't have that. But I'm extremely grateful for so many reasons, both because this person and this story is so important to me, but then also it's just dope to be able to share, to have these kind of lifelong friendships and partnerships, and to just be able to share them with other people. because not everybody is blessed to have something like that, you know? So to share what that can be like and what that can feel like. And there are certainly moments where, especially when my man Ant just reminded me that when me and Brendan were touring together, there are times where our idiosyncrasies just got to be too much. Like we were together every day, damn near for 10 years straight. We toured so much. Like we did 150 to 200 events a year. Like we were always on the road. We were roommates for most of that. Like I just could not watch him butter bread ever again at some point. You know what I'm saying? And it's really beautiful to have these lifelong friendships, brotherhoods, companionship, partnership, where our families are connected, our lives are connected, our work is connected. You know, I'm gonna get a little emotional, but at the end of it all, when it's like, this is Ali and this is what he did in his life, that couldn't be that without him, without Brendan, without BK. And the same is true for him. You can't tell either of our stories without the other one. And so, my man Slug is that way. There have been other people on the podcast that are like that, but there's is a smaller number that are that in the way that this guy is. So thank you for listening. I'm gonna say on the mic too that we talked for like 7 hours or something. But my man James Huff, who's part of the upper tier of the Caravan, I'm gonna be in DC speaking at organization that he's on their board, and I think I'm staying at his crib. Huff, I'm staying at your crib, right? He actually was saying, "Yo, for the Caravan members, give us that whole conversation with no edits. We want to hear it. Like we'll sit down and listen to the whole thing." So I'm just saying on the mic that I hope that BK will give us that and that we'll be able to put it in the Caravan section for the members in case you want to listen through 5 to 7 hours of 3 different conversations of us doing it all, going all in. Thank you so much to Amna Mirza, to Mansoor Panawala, to Darren Washington, to Last Word, to Mark from Medina Hip Hop who did the logo, to Ant who did the beat that we use for this podcast, and just everybody that helped, all the people that listen and give me feedback. Much love to you all, and we hope to see you next week. And I love you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.